another one that I'm relatively familiar with, and then we're going to get into the discussions that I have not been able to read up because the list you sent me was lengthy. Do we do Biden's recent losses in Texas and Louisiana?
Sure.
Okay, so for anyone who doesn't know, this is an interesting thing. Biden comes into office, issues a bunch of executive orders, or at least one executive order, which effectively says we're going to stop enforcing federal law as relates to immigration and immigrants coming in illegally from the border, which required anyone who was detained by ICE who was guilty or had convicted a crime to then be released but detained by law enforcement. And I hope I'm not mixing up two cases here. But they issue an executive...
They're related because one of them was a return to Mexico policy that the Trump administration negotiated, and the other one was about releasing them once they're here, and they're interrelated in terms of what's happening. What's happening is they're not returning them to Mexico, and instead of detaining them, they're releasing them. And so the different states sued over both parts.
Okay, now I'm going to listen to this as I run upstairs, but you need to steelman the argument. What is the rationale to not force them to return to Mexico pending their asylum claims? And what is the rationale for releasing them, for ICE releasing them if they've committed crimes? I'm listening. I'm just going to go get my dog.
Their official explanation was that that they don't have enough capacity to keep them and that it's somehow unjust to return them to Mexico. So, I mean, that they didn't. I mean, part of the weakness of their case was that part of this claim was brought under the Administrative Procedures Act. And the argument was they didn't have a lot of good evidence for what they did and why they did it. And so the return to Mexico policy went up this week to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. They affirmed what the district court did unanimously, said clearly that this should not be allowed to continue and that the return to Mexico policy needs to be reinstated. Then it went up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and Justice Alito, in a kind of surprise decision, temporarily reversed it, said the stay is no longer in force. They can continue to bring people in and release them until Tuesday when the whole Supreme Court can say yes or no on the stay. But it's always fascinating which things that they gets the Supreme Court's attentions and which ones don't. In fact, constitutionally questionable vaccine mandates, they get to take another nap for a couple of weeks. But, the poor Biden administration getting to do an illegal policy on illegal immigration, even the conservative justices want to give him a break for a while. So I found it a peculiar action, but it may just have been because he couldn't get the other justices on the phone. And Alito has done this in the past where he has reversed a stay until all the justices can rule on it. But, and this only happens during the summer because normally it always gets referred to the whole court. But so that's where so the whole court will be deciding later this week. I don't understand how they're going to reverse a unanimous appellate court and a district court, given the strong factual record against Biden on the return to Mexico policy.
Well, so I guess to simplify this or to explain it for anybody who doesn't know, Congress creates the laws, the executive enforces the laws. This is how I remember it. Congress creates, executive enforces, judiciary judges. So you have Biden coming in and issuing an executive order that basically says, don't follow the law. Am I oversimplifying to the point of inaccuracy, or is it quite literally effectively what the executive is saying with these memoranda? And then how do they possibly withstand any judicial scrutiny?
So far they've lost all of this other than the Alito temporary reprieve. And because that's the same thing that happened in the other case brought by, one was Texas and Missouri, the other one was Texas and Louisiana. And the district court in the Western District of Texas in San Antonio Division went through the voluminous record and, it said what's happening here is clearly illegal and violates the Administrative Procedures Act. Because it's not only that it's that the executive branch is instructing their own law enforcement officers to not enforce the law to the detriment of the states, but that they're doing so in a manner that doesn't follow any kind of due process under the Administrative Procedures Act. But the Biden administration has been doing this in a lot of context. Afghanistan, you can argue they just skipped everything. What they're doing in the FDA and vaccines, they're kind of skipping everything. So it's sort of ruled by fiat. It's the pandemic lockdown order kind of mindset has that infection has spread to all these other decision-making roles.
No, it's I mean, it's we've seen it in Canada. It's like the government no longer needs to pass laws through the standard way. Just edicts, fiats, whatever else we want to call them. They just basically say, okay, well, this is the law now. Sure, we don't have to have any public debate. We don't have to have any evidence. Just this is what we're going to say is going to happen, and fight us in court, and we'll fight you tooth and nail with your, to your last tax dollar. It's effectively what they did with the moratoriums, the CDC moratoriums, and they just thumb their nose at it. And what's the consequence? I guess you have an election in a couple of years. So hold on. So the injunction was issued. What did the Supreme Court stay the injunction, or are they going to hear it on an emergency basis?
They stayed the injunction for 3 days. Well, Alito did.
Stayed the injunction, which means the injunction is not in force. The executive order itself is now being applied. Yes. There will be no return to Mexico, and there will be no detainment by law enforcement after the release by ICE of illegal immigrants who have broken the law.
Correct.
Until Tuesday. And then how long does it take the Supreme Court to adjudicate on this?
Presumably they'll decide yay or nay on whether to reinstate the injunction or not. So, we'll see. I guess everybody was busy partying, and so Alito couldn't get everybody on the phone. That's the best interpretation. Otherwise, I found it a peculiar thing to interfere with, especially given their nonchalant non-involvement in so many other matters that were of great consequence to far more people. But I think ultimately Biden administration, the factual record is so voluminous that the district courts have found in both of these cases, like a prior district court did in an analogous immigration context, that I don't see them prevailing. And basically all they've done is buy themselves a little bit of time. They've allowed what Biden said he was doing with the CDC eviction order. Yeah, sure, it's unconstitutional, but it'll take him a couple of months to get around to ruling on it. So I got some time. So, I think that's what's unfortunately taking place. But hopefully the law at some time, someplace, comes into force.
All right. Well, that's interesting. So this week will be interesting on the executive order front. What else? Was there something else that Biden had not been successful on in the courts this week? Well, that was it, eh?
Yeah, he was sued by the various oil companies for not allowing and interfering with pre-existing oil leases on federal lands. And so they sued under about 6 different statutes, including, again, the Administrative Procedures Act. But what all their claims really come down to, they have certain specific statutory claims unique to how oil leases and public lands are regulated. But all of it sort of comes back to also the process here, that he just did something unilaterally without going through the investigative process, without going through the notice and comment process, without honoring pre-existing contracts and agreements. He's just operating by executive decree, like everything's an emergency now. So, some of us said this is what was going to happen. Once courts stuck their head in the sand and let all these every little tin cup dictator or every little mayor become a dictator by edict. In the name of emergency, this was going to infect all the politicians, and it has. And Biden administration's been one of the most egregious at it. But it's a suit that's a very strong suit, so it looks like that his ability to enforce that is also in doubt over time. But the suit was just filed.